A math teacher observed that as the number of hours students spent studying for their spelling test increased, the number of spelling errors they made on their test decreased. They then graphed this data on a scatter plot where the x-axis represented time spent studying and the y-axis represented the number of errors. Which statement is true about the scatter plot? Let's go. All right, what we have here is a pretty simple idea, but it sounds kind of complicated because you have to read this maybe multiple times to figure out what they're saying. They're saying that as students spent more time studying, they tended to make fewer mistakes on their spelling exams, which makes sense, right? You work hard, you make fewer mistakes. That's kind of what you guys have learned in school. So let's plot some points on a scatter plot here. And I think visualizing what they're talking about with some example data would really help make sense of what this question's asking. Imagine that this student basically didn't study at all. So they studied 0 hours. That student, unless they're just a brilliant scholar, is probably going to make a lot of mistakes. So they have a 0 for their x value and a large y value. So I'm going to put that dot there to represent that one student who slacked off and made a bunch of mistakes as a result. Okay, maybe somebody else studies a little bit more. So maybe they study a half hour and then they make slightly fewer mistakes, but they probably could have stood to study a little bit more. So that'll be that student right there. A little bit of time studying, still quite a few mistakes. Now somebody else spends a whole bunch of time studying and maybe they only make a couple mistakes. Somebody else spent like kind of a moderate amount of time studying and maybe they make a few more mistakes than that other person. Now maybe somebody is just super lucky and guessed a couple words right, but they didn't study a lot. Maybe that person shows up somewhere like here. Not a lot of studying, but somehow they didn't make a lot of mistakes. What I'd end up with if I kept doing this for every student in a class is this is a scatter plot. The x value here is the time studying, the y value here is the number of errors that student or student on average would have made. And then what I could do is I could draw a line of best fit for all this data, right? There's no perfect line that's going to perfectly connect all of these as a straight line. But if I drew a line of best fit, maybe it would look something like this, right? This is the line of best fit that says this best captures the overall summary of the data on my scatter plot. And what I can see is that as I spend more hours studying, it definitely looks like I'm going to make fewer errors on my spelling test on average, right? It won't perfectly be the case because some people make more or fewer because they're lucky or a little bit, maybe a little lazy. But what happens is we get this general trend that the more time studying, the fewer mistakes you tend to make. Now, what this question's talking about is what is the slope of this straight line that we would imagine as the best line for all the data on our scatter plot? We can very clearly see that this line has a negative slope. Remember that a positive slope line goes up from left to right, looking something like this, and a negative slope line goes down from left to right, looking something like this. We are clearly dealing with a negatively sloped line in this situation. So what we can say is that there was a general negative slope in the data, C, even though we didn't know the individual data. So our answer is C, and if you got that right, great thinking.